Hi, everybody. Ken Morse here. Um, this is our first experiment with doing a town hall on Facebook Live. Um, the and like I said, this is a brand new thing that we're learning. In these times, we have to find some new tools um, to deal with the fact that we can't get together face to face. And so we're trying to learn these various digital tools. Um, and a few comments about the way this works, the way Facebook Live works. I'm here. You can see me. Unfortunately, I can't see any of you. Um, but I can see if you put comments in, and that's really helpful. And actually, just to give you a chance to try it, the first thing I'd like you to comment on is what town you're tuning in from. So if you could do that, that would be great. And then as we go along, you are welcome to add comments or add questions of things that you would like me to talk about. Uh, this um, this this program, this event automatically gets recorded and gets saved uh, to Facebook, and also I'll be putting it up on YouTube. Um, and if we don't get to answer all the questions, then um, if I don't get to answer all of your questions, then I'll do that and do a recording to answer those questions. So let's see. So hi, I see Leisha is here, and Jason is calling in from Norway, and Richard McSherry is also tuning in from North Norway. Diane Morse, my sister, is tuning in from Waterford. And so, as you can see, when you put a comment up, I can click on it and it will show on the screen. So it's a good way for you to ask your questions. I'll start by just talking a little bit about our campaign and some of the issues that are important to me. But then I hope that you all will have questions and that I can give a shot at trying to answer them. Or at least I can find out what's important to all of you. Um, I am running partly out of a deep and I'd say growing concern for our democracy. Um, the Our campaign slogan, as you can see, is rooted in community, and I feel like it's extremely important that our democracy is rooted in democracy, and that it's not that policies and decisions are not being made by those who special interests and the big companies that represent the concentration of power and money. And so that's a good reason I'm running, is to try and reground our democracy in in our local communities and make sure that our elected officials and our government is being responsive and helping to provide for real security for all folks. Um, I heard yesterday a report on NPR about a new book that is uh, 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 that is about democracy, and I'll post a link to it in Facebooks in case you're interested. There's a lot of things that we need to do to make the democracy stronger. Um, right now, one of the key things is being sure we're guaranteeing and if anything, expanding voter rights. There, especially with COVID, we hear way too many stories about voting becoming really much harder for people and discouraging people. So we need to figure out better ways to give voters opportunity to vote. And right now, a really key thing is um, to encourage people to do absentee voting to get their ballots, and the part of the problem is many of the people that work at the polls are older, and it's going to be a challenge to do that. But there's a lot of other ways. We need to increase public financing. As most of you know, I think I'm running as a clean elections candidate, and I couldn't run if it weren't for that. There's big problems with gerrymandering, and just in general, we need to increase our understanding of democracy at many levels, even at the community level. And a key question I have is, can we really have a political democracy if we don't have more economic democracy? Um, so that's a big issue, something that I'm working on, and many of these things are issues that I'm trying to learn a lot more about. I'm just going to check and see here. Uh, and Jason is asking, how do we get absentee ballots? I'll post the information about that. You request one from your town office, and it's something probably for the primary anyway, which is coming up in about 3 weeks now. It's something you probably need to do pretty soon. Let's see. Richard McSherry is saying he's posted some information. Hopefully, folks can see that on the screen about democracy. So I'll go ahead and make sure that gets put into Facebook where it's easier to access. And then Richard also talks about the tax code, and I could not agree more. Our current tax rate, the top tax rate is about 40%. After World War II, the top tax rate was 90%. So we have emerged from crises at times and been able to tax the wealthier folks more than we currently do. But we have to rebuild our democracy from the ground up if we're going to be able to make those changes. And I see Linda McSherry has joined us too. The other, I'm not going to try and go into lots of issues here today because of timing. I am interested and hoping to do sessions something like this every week. and when I do that, then we'll be able to really dive into a lot more issues. Um, so I would just ask before we move on, what do you? Some of you have offered, but what do others of you think we uh, should do to improve our democracy? Um, the issues that were the most important to me, um, that helped me decide to run, were food systems work and climate issues. Um, as we know, way too many people, Maine has very high rates of food insecurity, uh, and the virus has exposed real problems in our food system. There, some folks say that we actually have two food chains, one that goes to all of us through uh, the retail outlets, and then another one that goes to institutions and to restaurants. And that second one, and they're not very well integrated, turns out, that second supply chain has really been disrupted because restaurants have had to close down, schools are closed, etc. Hospitals are very limited. So that has created huge issues, and I'm sure you've all heard stories about um, farmers that have been dumping milk or letting food, composting food that otherwise would have been good food to go. Um, Now I'm seeing some more comments, so I'm going to. Richard McSherry once again is weighing in, saying that ranked choice voting is one thing that we need to do. Um, and let's see, here's another comment from Diane, and she's saying, I think we need to realize and examine our part in racism, and I think it's been a real wake up call for all of us recently, and I agree, and I think that here in Maine, it's not only blacks, but it's indigenous folks and it's people of color. And so there are a lot of, and many of those folks are the folks that are most in having troubles with the unemployment and the economic impacts and the disease of COVID-19. There's a lot of the food system groups are doing working on this. There's some work on the racial wealth gap, doing simulations that we haven't done yet here in this area. They've done it in a few other parts of Maine, but our food council here is talking about doing that. I heard that I think the blacks have like about 20% of the wealth of white folks, and that has been a persistent gap. And there's folks who say that we need to do work to close that gap, and I agree with that. Showing some other comments here. Richard McSherry says some of the tales from SAD 17 employees who delivered meals by school bus were enlightening in a horrible way. And I am not exactly sure what that means, but I know from when we started going door to door back in February before we had to stop, it was pretty eye-opening, the levels of poverty that are right here in these hills, and in talking with people, getting some sense of what people are struggling with to make ends meet. Um, let's see. Whoops. Jason says, I think it's important that people on both sides of the aisle are talking with each other. And and I agree. I think that part of the rancor that's so prevalent in our political system, I think it's probably worse at the national, the federal level, but we are so polarized, and that makes uh, creating stronger democracy really, really difficult. That coupled with the challenges of news and the way the internet is being used. And I think there's a lot of good things, and hopefully even tools like this that help us. But on the other hand, there's a whole culture of news, and you see it related to climate, and you see it related uh, the virus and a lot of other things, that where people are very confused as to what the science it really is, and that's a result of how divided we are. And so I think at the community level, we do have a lot stronger opportunity to work beyond that. I don't think that those problems are quite as serious at this level, but on the other hand, it's going to take us a lot of work, and we do have some real political differences. Um, and Nikki says, "How is that done in such a standoff?" I guess maybe what she means is, how do we overcome that polarization? I think honest conversations. One of the things that I find very disappointing running is that we can't go door to door. Like I said, we started pretty early. There was quite a bit of snow on the ground when we got out to talk to people, and we had the goal of visiting over 2,000 homes, and we had to stop, and that would be a chance to listen to people and really get a sense of what is happening. And sometimes there'd be difficult conversations related to that. The the other big issue that prompted me, which is very related to food systems work, is climate problems. I have learned a lot about climate. I've been working pretty closely with folks like Scott Blon at the Center for Ecology-Based Economy, and Scott's been doing these amazing presentations, slideshows about food systems and climate. The way our industrial food system works, it is creating about 40% of our dependency on fossil fuels. So I think we really have to work hard here in Maine to try and do something about climate. With the current administration, there is the Climate Council work that's going on. I think that's overall good. There has been criticism, and I've been involved in some discussions with folks that say there are not enough vulnerable folks with vulnerabilities whose voices are part of that process, and I think that is a problem. Um, the the um, there is a lot of work going on at the state level. There are a lot of other groups that are also working on this. I was just on a webinar that was held for candidates the other day, and there's a group called Renew. The Maine People's Alliance is one of the really key groups, but there's over 100 different groups in this coalition. Environmental groups, labor groups, all sorts of key groups. Um, and they have done a lot of work and are have a plan, an emerging plan. They're still talking with people about it. They part of the plan is to engage legislators, and that's why they held this webinar the other day. They're rolling it out to the public this coming Tuesday, and the group is called Renew New England, and they have some key folks that will be part of presenting that, and I'll post on Facebook how you can register if you're interested in doing that. As you can see from what I showed here on this slide, that Bernie Sanders and Ayanna Pressley and folks from the Sunrise Movement and some key progressive folks will be part of that presentation. So it's one thing I'm doing is trying to learn about these issues, and there's a lot to learn, but I am being able to learn quite a bit. Let's see. Leisha says there are bills coming up about racial issues and racial justice. Some good stuff, and yeah, I think there are folks involved in that. I was part of a discussion the other day with a number of folks that are working with the Maine Black Caucus and with some of the Maine Indian folks as well. So people are working on that. I think that we have a long ways to go to eliminate the systemic racism. I think that there'll be increasing calls not only for changes in policing, getting policing to shift from being warriors to being guardians, but I think there will also be, and there already are, calls for reparations and other things that will help to close the racial wealth gap that I talked about before. And Leisha added that she hopes that we have the votes, so before I go on, we won't go on too much longer, but I'd like to ask what do all of you think that we should do to deal with the climate challenge? If you could put any comments in the comments, then I can share that with other folks. So like I said, I will be having more of these conversations. I'm also open to organizing Zoom conversations. They're a little different. I'm sure most of you have been on Zoom these days, but the advantage of that is we can see each other, and I can hear your voices and not just read your comments. So there are some comments coming in about climate, I believe. Richard McSherry says that we need to pass various bills at multiple levels. Nikki says encourage solar development. And in that, if you look at that document that I put up before, the one where they're doing the rollout on Tuesday, they talk about their focus is primarily jobs and the sorts of jobs that would emerge from something like a Green New Deal to deal with climate change. And they have specific ideas about housing, health, food, energy, transportation, and dealing with pollution, cleaning up air and water. And all of those are presented in the way that it would help to create jobs for people. And they can be good jobs. And I fully believe that while it may cost some money to do this, that we can afford it, especially if we elect progressive legislators and we can make our tax code fairer. And there's a lot of information in the Renew report that I put up that is about how we're going to finance all of this. Some of the comments I'm a little, because it takes a few minutes for them to come in, I'm a little unsure what they respond to, but here Jason says don't fly unless you absolutely have to. Leisha again says support Maine's Green New Deal. Maine already has legislation that was passed last year that begins to deal with especially employment issues around the Green New Deal. Diane says to conserve water. And Linda McSherry says support legislation to promote solar power. And that's a very important thing. Maine had legislation that including some that promoted solar power, and there are moves in the legislature now to encourage solar power, but along the way, when Governor LePage was in, he vetoed that. From what I understand, the utility companies' lobbyists are so strong that people were not able to override the veto. So that's why we need to continue to get more progressive folks into the legislature. Richard says climate, solar, rehab, reuse of existing buildings, and those are all a key part of this Renew proposal I mentioned. Upgrade the grid for micro producers, smart controls, and that is, making broadband more available really is an important issue that I support. Many people compare it to the rural electrification that happened back along that brought electricity out into the rural areas, and I think there is a real parallel in that. And Richard also says check your 401k, invest where your heart is, and that's a key part of the climate movement right now, is putting pressure on companies to disinvest in fossil fuels. And one thing I've learned is that the main employment pension fund has a lot of money, but a lot of it is invested in fossil fuel companies, and a lot of it is invested in companies outside of Maine. Wouldn't it make so much more sense not to invest in fossil fuels and to invest that money in ways that improve the economy and the security of folks right here in Maine? Marcia Sharp says greatly reduce use of plastic bags and other plastics. Yeah, it's a huge issue. And I was just listening to a podcast today about whales and the damage that they and other fish and critters in the ocean are facing from how rampant the I don't remember the numbers. It's huge, the amount of plastics that we've put into the ocean. Richard says, and just a side note, I'd be curious to see how well you can see the comments that I'm putting up on the screen. I think there's adjustments I could make. I don't dare to try and do it midstream here, but put a white background in or something so that those comments are more readable. So it's a real learning curve to do this. But so Richard said there's now a bill from energy producers to kill net metering credits nationally. Yes, there's so many. It's sad that how much special interest and big companies and wealthy folks use their influence to influence our legislation. And when big business and big government become one and the same, it's basically the definition of fascism. And I'm not sure that we're all the way there yet, but there's certainly autocratic tendencies that need to be corrected. Nikki asked, how do we get industry behind plastics biodegradable? That's a good question. I think there is work going on that, but I think my sense is that what part of the solution to climate is we have to change our lifestyles and become less consumers or become wiser consumers. And certainly because of my work with food systems, I feel that we have to become much more self-reliant, depending on these global supply systems, which come about because there's so much concentration in the industry, concentration of power and control over these systems. And then it requires a lot of extra plastics and fossil fuels for transportation. The more we bring our economy and have it grounded in the what I call the grounds of our existence, the local resources, and adjust our lifestyles to that, the more resilient our communities will be, and the less damage we'll do to the planet. Oh, good. Folks say they can see the comments pretty well. Good. That's good. Well, I think it's there's certainly a lot more to talk about. Whoops, I already showed that one. But I think we'll wrap things up. I said we'd go for 20 to 30 minutes, and it's been 35 minutes. If you want more information, you can visit our website. It's just kenmorse.org. And there is information there on ways that you all can help. We are gearing up to be much busier. The way the public financing, clean elections financing works is there's very limited funds available to candidates until after the primary. But the primary is, and of course the primary was delayed by about 5 weeks. So we'll be having a lot more money. We'll be able to buy signs. We'll be able to do more outreach, and we are also gearing up to do phone calls to people. And so we could use help with phone banking, and there's just a lot of ways that, like what we're doing now, all of you who are commenting and responding. One thing we've learned is that with Facebook, Facebook spreads out your posts a lot more the more people interact with them. So the more all of you share posts and like posts and add comments, things like that, then that all really makes a big difference. So I think we'll wrap it up there, and I really appreciate all of you joining. This is the first time we've done this, so it's there's quite a learning curve, but like we like to say, we're making it up as fast as we can, and we appreciate all your support and help. So I'm going to sign off there. Thanks again.